always.
Awesome. Well, we are here after a few sound checks. Now we're successfully unprocessed, Locavon unprocessed, here with Kyle Rasch from Third Leaf Farm, which is an organic, regenerative apple farm here in Rockford, Michigan. Is it Rockford?
We're actually in Greenville,
Michigan.
Just outside of Rockford.
Yeah, well, we're neighbors.
Yeah.
Same thing. West Michigan, which is the pinnacle of apple production to begin with. And I would say you're probably at the pinnacle of the pinnacle. So really excited to hear about it and all of your experience, but thanks for being here today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me and thanks for the invite.
Yeah. Awesome. So I guess the basics. So you are a multi-generational apple farm, here in West Michigan. You've somewhat recently become, the guy. And you and your brother and maybe some others have sort of really taken a keen eye towards the methods that you use to farm, the practices, really focused on regenerative farming, organic farming, certified organic, and almost just as much, it's really about a certain level of responsibility in creating the best possible fruit that you can in a way that's as healthy as possible for the planet and the consumers of the fruit. So,
well said.
Not easy to do, though. A lot easier to say than do. So don't give me the credit for saying it. I want to hear about the practice and what it really takes to do that, because it is not easy.
Yeah. Well, first off, it is definitely not only myself that's the guy by no means. I'm
one of the guys.
I'm one of the guys, but yeah, there's many of us. It takes quite a team, quite a lot of people who've been in part of this movement. And
I imagine. And
on our own farm, I'm third generation, so I'm still following in the footsteps and the shadows of giants. And
that's amazing.
They've planted the seeds for where we are today, and
no pun intended.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's just talk about that, because it is incredible, especially in farming, how it seems to be one of those things that really does it becomes a multi-generational thing, a real legacy. And there's a lot of businesses, a lot of different types of businesses that sort of do that. But I think farming seems to be one of the more prominent. And maybe that's a combination of, you grew up on a farm. If your dad owns car dealerships, you probably went to them when you were a kid and stuff. But when you're on a farm, you live on a farm. Yeah. And you do farm stuff, I imagine. And it becomes probably part of your being. And so it's probably a natural thing to carry it on, but that's pretty cool. So tell us about the history of your farm.
Yeah.
And then also I'm just curious about, you must just walk through the field sometimes and be like, man, this is 100 years old. Like my kin were walking around here farming apples. That's pretty neat. And I don't think a lot of people actually have that. Yeah,
no, it's a big responsibility, but we've been on this land now since the 60s, actually, is when my grandfather arrived there.
Wow.
And he was, actually, I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this recently because I'm writing an article for a magazine, actually, about kind of our story and story of regeneration on our farm. So I was just interviewing my grandpa yesterday. I spent a couple hours with him. I've heard the story so many times, but there's something special about actually getting it recorded and going from start to
That's exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun and really great. He's getting older and every moment is precious now.
So did he immigrate, or was he born here? Or
they grew up just on the other side of Rockford here in Sparta, actually.
Oh, cool.
So grew up on an apple farm, but a diversified farm as well. So
really?
Back at that time, everyone grew everything, and you kind of, you grew your way to the table. Basically, everything you ate was from your backyard, and along with trying to make
the ultimate loca.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, they were telling me about all the varieties, and it's just incredible. This whole wealth of richness that we've kind of moved away from over the years. But I spent a lot of time reflecting on that.
So your farm is third generation, but apple farming is more than that. Then.
Yeah, I don't know if we've ever not apple farmed. I'm not sure. I haven't got back far enough to find out there wasn't an apple tree somewhere. So
crazy.
I I grew up on the farm, like you said, just it's hard to explain what farm life is like, but very free range to the nth degree, where you could get in a tractor and get into any kind of trouble, or hop in the woods and get lost for a day, or run through the orchard. I actually grew up and we were conventional farmers when I grew up. So I always remember running around the farm and we had these massive irrigation guns that just kind of shot in a 300-foot circle. And those hot days in the summer, you just sit out there and run through the irrigation. And then the second part of the day, you'd be running away from a sprayer because it was something we weren't supposed to be around, but we were roaming around the orchard and didn't think anything of it back then.
So you can irrigate apple trees?
Oh yeah, they need irrigation.
Really?
Yeah,
I did not see that. I've already learned something.
Yeah, I mean, you can grow a large enough apple tree that the roots are fairly resilient, but the trees now have smaller roots. And my grandfather was telling me they had trees that were spaced like 40 feet apart, 40 feet in either direction. So it was. Right now we're planting over 2,000 trees per acre, and back then it was like you could count it on your hands how many trees were on an acre. So
are you doing the dwarfs or semi-dwarf? Or?
Yeah, so we did the large trees. My grandfather kind of moved into some semi-dwarfs over the years, and then my dad really embraced the dwarfing trees. And now I've been kind of stepping back and saying, what have we forgotten or missed out on by moving to those dwarfing trees? So starting to move back to some of the larger roots, but kind of redesigning the canopy so that we can still have the benefits of moving into a more just an innovative approaches that the dwarfing systems allow for, but still have the resilience of a strong root. So it kind of looks like a vineyard, I guess you could say. So the trees come from one large root, but they branch out into all these smaller leaders. So.
Wow, that's interesting. So this is the thing that I was excited about, was that you guys, you're of the farm stock, right? But you guys are also very scientific in your approach, data-driven, chemistry. What's the background of you and your brother? And you guys have sort of diverse but very scientific backgrounds, right?
Yeah, I think mine has always just been curiosity based. So I went to school and had kind of this intention of going through university and coming up with this amazing degree that was going to mean something, and had no intention of coming back to the farm, and ended up trying everything and nothing really stuck. So I ended up traveling the world for better part of a decade and working on organic farms. So really my curiosity took me all around the world, and I learned by doing and just asking questions, constantly asking questions.
Where'd you go?
I started in Australia and just meandered my way around I went through New Zealand and then through Europe, Italy.
And it was always going to learn farming, or were you there for other personal reasons?
Yeah, well, I was like, I'm just going to go and find myself in Australia because I was failing at university. And first thing I did was get lost in a big city, have no idea what I was doing. And then going and kind of curling up in a ball in an organic farm. And suddenly I just felt at home. And it was ever since then, I just love traveling through the lens of a farmer. And
that's cool.
It's a language you speak. Once you've farmed your whole life, you can go on to any farm and you don't have to speak the language. You can just start doing the actions and fit right in. And then you get to experience culture through the lens of farming. So it's awesome. Incredible. And
my God, there's so much to unpack here. So many questions. Let me start with this.
Yeah.
Are organic practices in the world, how would they relate, similar or different to America?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think some regions don't define organic so...
They just farm.
They just farm, yeah. I mean, I was in India, and there it was like everything was organic in some regions, and some regions were very westernized, and it was actually far more toxic than we do here because they have no regulations. It's not like they're going to get certified by some food packing company. It's just...
Were the ones that were doing it organically by default, like they had no option?
It was,
Or they were like, oh no, we're going to do organic.
That was, not the case in these villages. It was like they were so far removed from areas where it was more realistic to just use natural practices. Sure. And then, there's some regions in India that do have, I think there's a whole state in India actually that's certified organic. So it's very different, local climate and local region specific. And I visited farms I didn't just work on organic farms. I worked on pretty much any type of farm you could imagine. Not traditional conventional farms, but I worked on biodynamic farms, on permaculture farms, on land rehabilitation projects. And every type of thing you could grow. I worked on two apple farms, but mostly diversified veggies. I worked on livestock farms and vineyards and kiwi farms, but pretty much you name it. I tried to work on every type of farm, just see what it was like and see what I was missing out in monoculture farming. And there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot that's similar, but yeah.
Now what about Europe? I mean, as Americans, you hear sort of Europe has the gold standard in food. Would you concur or is?
Yeah. I mean, from a system approach, I would say Europe has the best system just because they've created these both incentives, but also this framework for farmers to succeed, where some farms and regions succeed just based on necessity and because they're growing things naturally with the land. And it was in distant regions. Usually the places far removed from society tend to have the systems I resonate with, but also it's the biggest struggle to actually bring into a commercial setting or into a setting where you sell to someone more than just your neighbor. And I think those are the things where Europe really thrives. They have such a strong system. There's also the side where they push so hard on regulation that you become less of a farmer and more of a paperwork person. So I think that becomes a challenge at some scales, and we've definitely got plenty of that in our world as well.
No doubt.
Go ahead. These certifications, and you mentioned that they're different in different countries.
Yeah.
Like, how would you measure like which are the most strict, which are the least strict, comparing like the US, Europe, Australia, India? Are they pretty similar, or are there pretty big differences in like what organic means to each of these countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not a professional at that, or I don't have a bunch of context for there, only the farms they're worked on. And I think it seemed very similar in many respects, kind of what they're looking for. I think the weakness in so many of these programs is that it's like a checkbox program. So they come out to certify you and they ask you, what have you done this past year, basically? So that system can be easily compromised. So I think the systems that are looking at really trying to look at beyond organic, not what are you not doing, but what are you looking to actually benefit the ecosystem? How are you measuring the nutritional integrity of those plants? And I think there's not a lot of large scale successes in that. I think it's a lot of small pilot things that are gaining momentum that are looking at measuring nutrient integrity and then actually testing for any residual pesticides or things that may have been a carryover from the previous generation. And I think all these things are starting to give a better lens at what is the highest integrity food we can be growing. And I could direct you to many examples of that. And there's also some grocery stores, I think that's where there's some big movement happening, because without the economic driver, without this container to bring something to market, it's difficult to have something and scale it, or to present an idea that's not just in this community, this one thing worked really well, but it doesn't share or cross-pollinate outside of that. So,
and it might be helpful for everyone if we just define what is organic, what is regenerative, for anyone who doesn't know, because I know that's what we're going to talk about a bunch, so maybe just up front.
Yeah, I'll do what I can to define it how I understand it, and based on the certifications and the projects we're a part of. So we're certified organic. We've been certified for 6 years, and that process is basically this process of not having any prohibited substances, which are basically all your conventional or synthetic compounds that go in the land. You can't have anything of that nature for 36 months. So that's the first, is kind of like a detox of the land. And then after that, it's then we're looking at what we're doing to the land. But really, organic focuses a lot on what not to do to the land. So it's about eliminating all of these toxic pesticides and synthetic nutrition and trying to look at natural things to replace that with. Or some people just eliminate those things and are organic by default because they don't do anything to the land. So technically that would be organic as well. So I think organic is very much about what you're not doing, and also trying to encourage some practices, but it's not required often to do something to benefit the land. So I think that's where regenerative kind of steps in and takes the next step of how are we actually benefiting the land? How are we creating something more nutritious? For us, we're getting certified regenerative organic. So it takes organic as a base, and then you add on looking at the soil and starting to look at benchmarks of where you're at today and making sure that you're constantly improving the soil over time, looking at the biology, the organic matter, the capacity for that soil to function for generations, and not to mine that, because technically you could be mining organic farms and just mining them to where there's nothing left. And there's many examples in conventional agriculture where it's organic for 3 years, we mine everything out of it and then go organic for 3 years and then go back to conventional, just to kind of reset the land, pump it back up with synthetic nutrition, and just kind of go through that cycle. So I think regenerative is really looking at this long time horizon, saying, what is the best way we can do this thing, agriculture, and provide food for people and have the highest integrity, while also creating something that is, that we can pass on for generations and generations, and that continues to iterate. It's not like this is regenerative forever. It's like, this is how regenerative we are today, and tomorrow we're going to keep shooting for this higher and higher as we learn, as we grow together. So
that's awesome. So there is a certification for regenerative.
There are many certifications, and that is one of the challenges. There's organic certification is a government kind of directed,
that's USDA
defined,
certified.
It's, exactly. Yeah.
Now for regenerative, is that also USDA or?
That's the challenge we're running into right now. Regenerative is still a very nebulous, undefined space. It's very, very muddy. And some people define regenerative as do one less bad thing. And some people define it as like doing everything to the highest degree possible. And so there's this whole spectrum, and there's probably half a dozen or more certifications for regenerative. So we've looked at all of them and found that regenerative organic kind of stands out as the highest degree. And it's also within regenerative organic, you can get a bronze, silver, or gold, depending on how much you are embracing this regenerative mindset, this philosophy.
Cool. Who's the governing body on it?
That is kind of governed by the Regenerative Organic Alliance, it's a mix of Dr. Bronner's, Patagonia, Rodale, kind of gets influence from some of these larger brands to help build the momentum. And then they've used that to tell their story or the story of their farms. Awesome. But it's pretty difficult to get gold, and that's what we're looking for. Is like we don't want to just start right out at the best thing. We know we can continually do better.
Sure. So but I guess it sounds like the underlying tenet is that you are regenerating the land, hence the regenerative, but you are actually taking steps to ensure that the soil quality is better than you found it.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a few pillars in the regenerative organic certification. So there's the soil, which is a huge part of it. Then there's the entire supply chain, and the actual what happens behind the scenes is also a big part of it. So it's looking at the entire supply chain, what happens after it leaves your farm, but also looking before at, for example, like it's looking at all the labor that happens on the front end, and how are you developing more community? How are you paying this very livable or beyond livable wage? Or I'd say, they have all these metrics, and we're really proud of what we've been doing there. And this is going to encourage us to continue to move forward and really support not only our employees, but the community around us as well.
That's awesome.
So regenerative, you're obviously making the soil better. Industrial farming is hurting the soil long-term. Yeah. But for the customer, like what's the benefit to them of better soil? How does it impact the food? And how are they benefiting from that other than just the sustainability of the farm?
Right. Yeah. No, I think that from a farmer's perspective is their best interest why they should go regenerative is the soil benefits. But for a consumer, I think it's really about what does that mean to have better soil, and those practices in regenerative agriculture are directly correlated very often with creating more life in the soil. And that's one of the best and most consistent things that stood out in research and data, is that the more life, the more diversity you have in a system, the more nutritional diversity you get in that fruit or that vegetable or whatever's growing on that land.
And life is insects, bugs.
Life is everything. Yeah, it's the plants that are growing on there. It's the insects to some extent. And then it's really the soil biology, looking at your earthworms, all your microarthropods and all of the
it's
bacteria.
Probably microscopic stuff.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just looking at it yesterday. And
really?
So
you test, how do you keep track of this?
This is the cool part.
Yeah, I wish I could keep track of all of it, and that we are constantly gathering data. I'm an endless learner and I'm just constantly curious about what's going on and learning more. And so that always started with more intuition in the beginning, was like sticking your finger in the wind and saying, this smells better, something's changing, but what is actually changing? So we started just doing our basic soil test, but we were coming from conventional agriculture where there really isn't a lot of measurements to say, is this getting more? It looks at very simple chemical terms in agriculture. So you're removing this much NPK from the apples you harvest, and you have to put this much back in. And we started looking at the life in the soil. So that's starting to do really complicated biological analysis of the soil, but looking first at everything that's in the soil. So looking at all your nutrients, but then also looking at the actual organisms in the soil. So we've DNA profiled the soil and looked at all the different organisms that are in there that are known anyway, and continue to learn how that's shifting over time, because it's not always that you get a lot different species. Sometimes you get a lot different. If you're killing everything in the soil, then you end up with not much going on in there. But we're really trying to look at what are these organisms and what are they actually doing to that system. So starting to look at the bacterial to fungal ratios, and then looking at it's really an endless, very uncharted territories as well. This is this soil revolution is happening in real time. So we're part of a lot of research, a lot of data gathering, and then we've also kind of taken it throughout the tree. So looking at what's happening in the tree because of the changes in the soil, and looking at sap testing is one thing that we do that we've been inspired by the regenerative movement and the momentum. I don't know if you've heard of John Kempf, but he's kind of this pioneer in sap testing and regenerative agriculture. He has his own podcast as well.
Oh, really?
And I'll plug him because it's an amazing podcast, the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast.
Awesome.
And you were saying that sap is sort of like the blood of the tree. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's the equivalent. Like if we, in conventional agriculture, we send leaves in usually is how we would do it, or send the fruit in. But that would be the equivalent of like chopping off your finger or sending in your hair, like this very historical look at what's happening. And it's not like a current snapshot of what's happening in real time. So with sap, we send in the leaves, but rather than them grinding up the leaves, they actually vacuum, they draw the sap out of the leaves, and then they just measure the nutritional profile of that sap so that we can get real-time look at, like, are we excess in some of these nutrients? Are we getting deficient in boron or in calcium? And I think the challenge in this space is that it's never really been looked at beyond a lot of your basic nutrients. So we're starting to measure all these nutrients that folks don't even know what level it's supposed to be at in apples. So we're starting to ask those questions, look at it, and start to gather data and create some benchmarks, and starting to create some more higher integrity trees. So like ourselves, like humans, the more nutritionally, the more healthy we are, the better we eat, the better things we put into our body, the more nutritionally balanced we become, or the more chemically and hormonally and all these things that start to get in alignment. And if we're eating a lot of sugar or eating a lot of things that are imbalanced, processed foods or what be it, our body starts to get out of its natural rhythm. And it's very much the same in a tree. You get these rhythms in nature that we fall out of because we're basically spoon feeding the trees exactly what we think they need, which is ends up drawing in many of these pests and diseases that now, generations later, people forgot that there were healthy trees. We just assume every tree is basically always susceptible to everything all the time. So.
Interesting. Now, have you noticed a change in the tree health and the nutrient in the apple as a result of this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we're continuing to ask. So right now, what we've been doing is a lot of sap testing, about 7 years of sap testing, and starting to see. So what we'll do is we'll take a sap test and we'll see if something's out of balance, and then we'll adjust that in real time with a foliar spray, actually. So we'll go out and put like a calcium carbonate on to increase the calcium levels, or seaweed to kind of rebalance the hormones, or even use like a fish emulsion to turn the tree's defense system on. They think that it's the same backbone, a chitin backbone that a fungus actually has. So it'll actually turn on its defense systems, but when that happens, actually the tree is creating hormones and creating antioxidants, basically, all these different phytochemicals that the plant uses to defend itself from pests and disease, which in conventional, we just do that with chemicals. So when you do that, you're actually increasing those same phytochemicals actually are what benefit humans. So we're increasing the antioxidants by doing that. So we've been starting to run tests. It's very expensive to run nutritional tests to do the full profile, but we've been part of a few projects. The Bionutrient Food Association and several other new ones are coming down the pipeline and starting to look at the difference in these practices. But it's always, to be a true scientist, you could sometimes get upset. So I was like, well, we're doing all these things and it's got to be like the biggest mover must be mulch, or it must be this thing we're doing, or compost. And it was the one standout was life in the soil. And it's like frustrating that it's all down to life, but it's also like that's really makes it easy for us. Okay, everything we do has to increase life.
Wow.
You're sort of like a food doctor. Like you go to the doctor, you get a blood test, you see you've got high cholesterol, and the doctor says, hey, you go on a statin or do this exercise. You come back a year later, you do another blood test, and you keep refining it. Yeah. It sounds like you do the exact same thing with the sap, and you just keep refining it. It's cool that you have 7 years of data.
7 years of data.
Trial and error, what works, what doesn't.
That's incredible.
And we're also doing it bi-weekly as well. So it's
bi-weekly.
Bi-weekly, and we actually compare 2 leaves at the same time. So we'll take the newest growth tip and compare it to the oldest point in this. So we get a branch that's maybe 6 to 12 inches long or 16 inches long in a season. And we'll compare those two. And the way nutrition moves in a tree, it actually different anions and cations move at different speeds and pull from different areas. So sometimes you may not have a benchmark, but you can see if potassium's getting lower in this leaf and higher in this leaf, you know that you're deficient in potassium in your tree or deficient in calcium. So we've got all these benchmarks, all this data, and conventional ag is saying this is not even legitimate science, and we have to send it all the way to the Netherlands because there's not a lab here that has really figured out how to do it well. We're hoping it comes up, but we're basically trying to be doctors to the trees, but I'd say more naturopaths or some kind of more looking at a nutritional and the whole picture, not trying to go out with a hammer and just say take this drug and this is going to fix you.
Wow. So ultimately though, the conclusion is that the better soil quality, the better life diversity and so forth does result in a more nutritious product.
That's what we've seen, but again, these are low data points. So we're working on a bunch of projects right now to really get some concrete data here and be able to present something with as much certainty as we can. And you mentioned my brother earlier, Devin. He joined the farm and he's a medicinal plant chemist by training. So we've been geeking out about this conversation for the past 5 or 6 years, and finally decided he was going to pause his endeavors in the medicinal plant space and come back to the farm. And it's been amazing. We've been really starting to brainstorm how can we create some very robust data sets, and also partnering with Michigan State University and all sorts of other universities and professionals in the world of this whole nutrition space is very much new and
Can you
exciting.
Speak to any of the early testing on some of the data?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that stood out to me, which was somewhat surprising, but it's a good thing to know on the shelf, is that varieties play a huge difference in the nutritional integrities, which is kind of frustrating for a regenerative farmer to say, okay, maybe some of these things are very variety dependent. So that was one thing that stood out in this early data that we sent in all sorts of farms. We sent in a bunch of apples from our farm, but we also sent in a lot of neighboring farms, and some of them you could see clearly the difference, this 1 to 5x difference in the different nutrients. Oftentimes the minerals are somewhat in a similar space, but once you get into these secondary plant metabolites, your antioxidants, your polyphenols, basically what makes an apple smell and taste. You got your sugar and your acidity, but outside of that, everything that you taste in an apple is mostly aroma, and that's from your phenolic compounds. And Devin could speak way more to this, but
so you said 5 times. So the nutrient density on some of these apples are 5 times higher than others.
Yeah,
that's not only 20%; that's 500%.
Yeah, it depends on the variety and all these things. But yeah, it's in some species it's way higher than that. Like blueberries, I think it was like 20 or something, 20x difference variability. Wow. And there's a lot of data coming out, but it wasn't the most exciting thing because no one knew what to do with that data, I think has always been the challenge. So you tell someone that this should have 20 times more X, Y, or Z, but when you get to a shelf, everything just is homogenized and no one is getting told that story. So that's what we're really looking to do, is get this very consistent quality that we can actually measure per apple, which is wild, but we're actually getting the tools now to actually go out in the field and use almost what's in your phone. Basically, it's getting to the point where they're envisioning a point where you can use your phone to just take a picture and see the nutritional integrity of a fruit. So
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, it's spectrophotometers, I believe, is the tool that you use, but it's just sharing light or sending light, and you get a reflect the same way they send light to other planets and can tell what the composition is. It's that same type of technology, I believe.
Are you going to be able to put like a cat nose and ears on the apple?
I mean, if it helps to tell our story, I would. Yeah.
I think that's a better use of technology.
Yeah.
I mean, who cares about nutrients? I want to see cat ears.
That's a little more helpful. Pump it up with some grape flavoring or something. Yeah, get some grapples out there. No.
So is when you say that the different varieties, do you grow one variety, many varieties? Are you in search of the ultimate variety? Is that your...
Yeah, that if I could just grow that one variety, that would be diversity. I'm way too curious to be content with one variety. And of course, there's by growing apples, we have some sort of a monoculture, but we can help to alleviate that one by all the stuff we're doing on the ground. So we're not having bare soil anywhere in the orchard. It's all multi-species cover going underneath the trees. So it looks a bit wild out there, more like a savanna or something. There's bushes and trees and all sorts of stuff growing all out. So it's very much dissimilar from the cookie cutter orchards that kind of our neighbors thought we were crazy when we were doing it. And now we're,
So do you have multiple different varieties like Honeycrisp and that sort of thing? Or are they the ones people think of like Fuji and Honeycrisp, or are they different?
I've got all the common varieties that you can imagine. We've got all of those, but about 10 years ago when I started traveling, I started learning about new varieties and planting them on the farm. So we've got well over 100 varieties, close to 200 varieties all over the farm. So that's cool.
How many are there total in the world?
In the world, there's well over 10,000 named varieties.
10,000?
Yeah. So that's just the named ones, though. There's so many that either kind of just faded away, just they're no longer planted or out of the historical record. But some of these apples, we're literally taking a branch from one tree and putting it onto another tree. And that's how we carry varieties forward into the future.
Yeah, like grafting them?
Yeah, grafting them. And some of those have been grafted, that same branch taken on for thousands of years. So there's varieties... 2,000 years old or even older, supposedly, according to how well records were kept back then.
Is it possible to create a new species by like cross-pollinating or?
Yeah, that's a very exciting space where a lot of people invest a lot of time and money into is taking two apples, basically two trees, and you collect the pollen from each of them, or you collect the pollen from one and put it onto the flower of the other tree, and then you seal that up so it doesn't get repollinated.
Oh, I was just about to ask, wouldn't that be happening naturally from bees?
It does, but you can't tell where it comes from or direct where you think, where humans think we need a Honeycrisp mixed with a Fuji. So that combination has been done probably 1 million times trying to get the next best apple. And that's
is there a species that is owned by like the University of Minnesota or something?
University of Minnesota has a huge breeding program. So we actually grow a couple of their varieties. Sweet Tango is one, and then Triumph is a new disease-resistant one. So that's where we are really excited about.
Now, do you have to pay them for that, or
you do? Yeah, they have royalties. There's all sorts of patented apples out there, so you can't grow them, or you have to pay a royalty to plant.
How do they know if you're growing them?
Can you just tweak it slightly?
Just cross-pollinate something else.
No, I think that I mean, you definitely could tweak it slightly, but I'd probably take shooting gamma rays at it and trying to get it to mutate, and I think they'd probably catch on to that. So no, technically, I mean, there's a lot of people that are underground, like the black market of apple scions trading all these scions that are technically regulated, but they don't like to see that, and that's why they save up money with these groups, is so they can go sue a farmer who plants the variety that they didn't pay for. So it's a whole part of agriculture now, is these club varieties. You have to get into the club, pay to be part of the club, and then you do
you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh gosh, it's a challenge. We've been a part of it. My dad signed up for one of these, and so we're members in this, growing this Sweet Tango apple that is a very incredible apple, and I think it serves a purpose in the commercial sphere of the apple world, or this space where everything is supply and demand, and the challenge in that space is that people get growing things to such a quantity and get excited, and then everyone plants it. And then there's this boom and bust in agriculture. And right now we're very much in a bust where everyone is not making money in almost any crop right now because everything is overgrown. So it's putting farms out of business because everything is overproduced. And with these groups, technically it's an idea that maybe we can get beyond that supply and demand, which of course has a ton of political, logistical, just it's icky. And I don't like that side of it, but I also see how it's preserved and kept farms alive as well. But patenting genetics and fruit just doesn't resonate with me either. So is
that true of everything, or is it just apples? Because you don't hear of like a variety of blueberries, at least I don't.
Oh yeah, no, there's patented blueberries. Really? There's patented so many things, but
watermelons, is that
sure
everything that, or just
I'd say like 95% of most of those industries are not patented, and these patents are attempts to try and, like I said, get outside of that boom and bust, and they also hold themselves to certain standards. So an example would be that people are maybe more familiar with is the golden kiwi from Zespri that comes out of New Zealand. That was one of the classic examples of a patented fruit that made those growers in New Zealand this whole new opportunity, and it created this whole new ecosystem, but they had to fund it through university research and all this breeding. And then when it came to market, they were able to grow it to a certain caliber. So you wouldn't be able to sell a poor quality golden kiwi. And so everyone trusts that that's going to be a good fruit. And that's the challenge, is like, how do we get growers to not have to get into this patented space to all say that let's try and grow better quality? Because there's a better way than just patenting our way out of this, I think.
I would agree. I'm almost surprised too, because to patent something, at least in industry where we come from, it has to be non-obvious. That's and it has to be something that hasn't been done. So like if I wanted to say I'm going to make a bigger tire, well, tires already exist. A bigger tire is just a bigger tire. So if it's like I want to cross-pollinate two apples that already exist, I'm surprised that somebody could patent that. But I'm not an expert.
It's a wild world out there.
That is a wild world.
Yeah, there's many farms that have done the same thing where they stumbled onto a unique apple in their backyard and then went around to patenting it. And that's like ambrosia. That's where ambrosia comes from. Really? Famous British Columbia variety that was found on somebody's farm, basically, and now they're making millions because they found the golden apple.
Wow, so literally interesting.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world. But
so I used to. Well, I had a property that had some very old apple trees, and the neighbor, we had this like old timer neighbor, and he used to work on that farm when it was a working farm in the 60s, I think. Yeah, and he said they were Northern Spy. These apples were extremely delicious, but they looked like terrible because they were, just growing wild. So they're lumpy and stuff, but just every bit as delicious as a normal apple. Yeah. Is there a way to make them visually appealing without a tremendous amount? Because that's the unfortunate thing about, I think, it drives a lot or the vast majority of some of the problems that we have in our food supply chain are driven by the fact that marketing people have been in charge of farming for too long. So it's like everything needs to look like a Betty Crocker.
Restaurants, they like seeing the farm raised salmon because it comes out the exact same every time.
Right.
Yeah. It's the same idea.
So how does that factor into what you're doing?
That is the pinnacle of my challenge in this space. It's the constant push and pull. It's that bridge, that fine line we're walking. And I wish I had a very solid, like, these are the ways to not have to struggle in that space.
It'd be nicer if people were like, I don't really care that the apple is symmetrical because it's actually better and it tastes better and it's got less garbage on it. But so that's the tide you're fighting.
That is, yeah. When I actually worked on a farm in Australia, that first farm I was mentioning, and they had created a whole movement in Melbourne where people were seeking out these ugly fruit because there's a bunch of data that shows how much, like, this specific thing, the data that I'm referencing here is apple scab, which is a fungus that's only purely aesthetic. It doesn't impact anything flavor-wise, but it creates a massive jump in antioxidants in the fruit and all these things that are good for us. And so they had told a great story in that space, and now everyone was going to the farmer's market and seeking out the ugly fruit, basically.
That's funny.
And
it's a good marketing campaign.
It is, yeah. I wish I knew how to take that and plug it here. I tried for many, many years, and it's just it's a difficult thing. We've all grown accustomed to everything looking a certain way on the shelf. And as soon as there's one apple that has a mark on it, we've been trained. We've trained the retailers and just the system at large. We think that's a bad fruit but yeah, that's very much this line I'm walking in Regenerative. It's like, if I could, I would grow the most amazing, flavorful, nutritious apples and only focus on that. But at the end of the day, people only buy the ones that look perfect.
Right.
So I'm constantly balancing that. And if I could find enough people, that would open up so many doors for us. But that's where we kind of entered this space of now looking at turning our apples into something and turning them into something that's shelf stable or something that we can
applesauce or
like
something?
applesauce. Like, we're at that phase right now where we're really trying to figure out what is our next, how do we make that next step into, we've figured out the farming side. We've figured out kind of how to grow regeneratively. And we have a whole group of farmers now that are following up behind us, but how do we now take that to a shelf and tell a story? Because an ugly fruit doesn't tell a great story.
Right. But it makes a great product.
It does. Yeah. The flavor, everything. And I shouldn't say that our fruit is ugly by any means. It's just, it could be it would be a lot less stressful as a farmer if we didn't have to focus on aesthetics. I would say that's probably 95% of the energy I spend in a year is focusing on how do we make this apple look as perfect as possible.
95%. Wow.
That at least the stress, I would say anyway.
Yeah.
So between that and a lot of certifications, we spend a lot of energy on to tell that story as well.
And so you had mentioned like you're finding ways to naturally make the tree defend itself against pests.
Exactly.
So that's certainly going to help.
Yeah. So that I would say the past 7 years has been the movement towards that. It's been every year softening our program more and more and relying just on nutrition, relying as much as we can on kind of really activating the tree so that it's ready to defend itself. And then last year came around and we were relying mostly on that. And then we had 2 or 3 things that popped up in the season and ended up marking up all of our fruit. And then some of them got damaged by moths, which happened to lay a small egg that then turns into a worm. And nobody, not even I get excited about a worm in my apples. So that's, I mean, to some extent, but it's so that.
You know, what's worse than a worm in your apple?
What?
Half a worm in your apple.
that is.
Come on, a little apple joke.
Yeah, no, that is. I've had that several times. Yeah. So,
but even that theoretically, it's really actually not bad for you.
No, it's probably great.
Probably good for you.
At some point, I thought of rebranding to like Wormy Apples, but I'm not sure if that would really land.
That's
or not.
A tough sell.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
So, when do you think in history? Like, cause I like to, I try and analyze the supply chain, our food supply chain, and like you said, in the 60s even, but even well before that, especially, you ate what was local to you, what was grown, you grew it in your yard. And then, industrial farming. And I think today, I don't think it had nefarious beginnings. I think there was a time less than 100 years ago, really, in this country where there was not enough food for people. People were starving, and the government and people in general had said, we need to feed people. Even if, and they also didn't have probably the same appreciation for health and so forth that we do, nor the same science, but they were like, corn, wheat, process it, step on it, feed people, get their bellies full. And then I think in the 60s through the 90s probably was that corporate, now we got conglomerates and publicly traded and shareholders, and we got to maximize profits. And they realized that, yes, you can increase profits by making the stuff into garbage, basically. And then the creation of dyes was driven by marketing, and certainly, preservatives and other chemicals were a result of more life, more shelf life, more everything. So it's if you look at it through 100-year lens, you went from everything was local, but there wasn't enough of it, to we've sort of gone, the pendulum has swung so far that I think finally people are like, we're killing ourselves by eating, to like, let's swing it back. But when would you say, if you have an idea of like when people were like, My apple needs to be a perfectly symmetrical, shiny apple with a little like, shine mark on the side of it and one leaf like hanging off it because apples just would have looked like regular apples, which a regular apple, a natural apple, has some lumps and it's not symmetrical and it has some of that scaling and stuff. The same exact taste as a perfectly symmetrical,
or far better
lab grade. Yeah, really. I mean, it's a better taste. When was it? Was there like a time that you could point to in history when like some marketing guy got a hold of a perfect apple, put it in a magazine, and then everybody had to do that? Do you know?
Yeah, when I was a kid, let's reflect. No, I was actually talking to my grandpa because I'm kind of curious about this same thing as well. Like when did they start asking for that higher quality, or what was it that drove that? And since
let's be clear, it's not higher quality, higher aesthetic.
Exactly.
When did they become concerned on the aesthetic?
The aesthetic, yes, that was, from my understanding, basically ever since he's been farming. Wow. They were still already driving for that. I think it's just been this snowball effect of as we get better and better at marketing and putting things on a shelf and wanting them to stay this pristine looking thing. It's a lot of supply and demand too. As the supply has increased, we've had too many apples. So how do we wean out the stuff that is more difficult to sell? And it was usually the apples that had marks that maybe stayed on the shelf longest.
Right. And then I guess, like you said, you could take the other ones and make applesauce out of them.
Right. Yeah. So but even since the 60s, he was already, so his father, he said, grew everything. They barely sprayed and it was all fine. There was a few things they sprayed for, but otherwise every apple found a home and made cider, made a little bit of everything. And no one expected an apple to look perfect at that time, but already my grandpa was born in the 30s, and by the 50s and 60s, it was already to the point where apples were getting to a higher production level and where people were looking at changing all these techniques of farming to best fit the system that they're finding themselves into. Wow. And and that means there's been basically every change from the 60s until now is like, how do we make an apple sell more on the shelf, basically? And that's went from, like you say, putting wax on it, trying to make it look shinier. And also a lot of the stuff that I grew up with was using this ethylene blocker, 1-MCP, 1-methylcyclopropene, and basically it freezes the apple.
Sounds delicious.
It's so tasty, yeah. It stops it from ripening, and it'll stop it from ripening for not only months, but a year and even longer. So you can preserve produce, basically freeze it in time when you stop ethylene. And how do you get it to ripen after that? You don't always get it to actually ripen that well, but you're delaying it. You block all those ethylene receptors, and they try restarting it after they pull it out of storage. But oftentimes those fruit never reach what they could have reached. And then there's all the questions of what else is that doing? And that's a whole nother conversation, but that gets applied in the storages. And then now it's getting applied in the field as well in conventional agriculture. So it's a concern, and it's also created this system that encourages people to just want to store things as long as they can. So we're getting fruit now that can store for over a year, and you can imagine what a year-old apple tastes like compared to a fresh apple, but it's not the same.
So it seems like there's this new generation of younger farmers taking over farms from, second, third generation, like yourself. And it seems like that group of farmers is more into the regenerative practices because maybe they have access to certain technology, access to certain data. Yeah. Can you talk about this whole new wave of farmers? I know you mentioned that you work with a group of farms.
Yeah.
Like you said. Yeah. And kind of how that's trending.
Oh, it's been incredible. The past 7 years since I got into this space, I was pretty much the laughing stock of the coffee shops, and everyone was like, "Oh, here's organic Kyle. Look out!" 'Cause I happen to have a cousin who has the same name, Kyle Rasch, as well. So there was conventional and organic Kyle, and but yeah, after doing this for quite some time, people started to scratch their head more and more, and now the past couple of years, we've been mentoring farms and teaching farms how to do this, and now there's well over half a dozen young farmers in the region that are moving this direction, and then constantly getting calls every day, just people wanting to know, can we really do this? Is it possible? And
not just apples, right? It's
there's other tree fruits.
Trees,
mostly tree fruits is my specialty, but outside of that, the young generation seems far more interested. And I think it's the old teach an old dog and new trick kind of mentality. It's for my dad. I got to witness that up close. It was
Yeah. What does he think about all the regenerative practices?
yeah, it's amazing actually. I've always inspired by him and his willingness and openness to change, but also the stubbornness of farmers. Just seeing it like right up close, that push and pull there. And I came back to the farm after woofing and traveling the world and coming back with all these ideas. I was like, we're going to convert the whole farm to organic and become a permaculture farm and do all this stuff that I learned about. It's like, we can do it. And he's like, yeah, this is great. Let's do it. But here's 20 trees to try on for now. We're not actually going to do this on the whole farm. So it was very much a wall that I wasn't expecting when I was traveling, but it was also very helpful because those first few years we added a couple acres and then we added 10 acres and another 10. And each one of those iterations, we learned way too much to where if we would have done the whole farm, it would have failed every single year. There's just so much to learn in our context. And we have very high humidity here. So we have a unique set of challenges, but he was begrudgingly kind of making those steps in the beginning. And I think he could see the potential there and he knew I was curious enough to figure it out, I believe. Is why he let me keep going. But he was like, not at all, didn't want to learn about any of it. It's like, if you can make it work, then we'll talk more. And 6-7 years into it, he's finally like, okay, it's working. We finally got some checks in the mail that were like, this is enough to probably be able to fund this. We don't know for sure because the first 5 years we were losing money, and finally got to a point where he's just said, let's convert the whole farm and let's do it. I want to be your partner. I don't want to try doing conventional farming alongside of organic. And it was incredible and exciting, and it's had its ups and downs all the way through there because he still comes from this conventional mindset where, okay, you have a problem, let's go get a bigger hammer and get rid of that problem. And in organic and regenerative, we're very much looking at the root cause of that and saying, okay, why is this thing really here? Is it
harmony.
Actually?
You're looking at harmony.
That's the goal is harmony. And the end goal is harmony with apples that look good as well. So
that's cool.
We're going to get there.
So let me ask you a question. It's a tough question, but and this would be, you can answer this in a general context.
Yeah.
So from an economic standpoint for a producer of anything, whether it's tree fruit, whether it's livestock, whether it's, vegetables, is it an economic viability to change an operation from conventional to regenerative?
It's a big question.
And I could phrase it like this. Are you doing it out of a sense of responsibility, but you're going to sacrifice primarily profit for that sake? Or can you do it and maintain profitability or enhance profitability?
It's a great question. It's what people ask me every day.
Age-old question.
It is. Why should we do this thing that seems way too romantic to be something that's financially feasible? My dad still asks me that every season, and I'm still working to make that such a level where he's happy to just disappear from the farm and go retire. But I think there's certain cases for regen where it makes a ton of sense. And there's some that are more challenging. I think livestock is one where it's like, it makes way more sense financially to become a regenerative livestock farmer. And in so many ways, I think the biggest challenge is that we're talking about systems that oftentimes don't even look at like a mirror image of what regenerative is going to look like. It's actually throwing everything out and starting fresh almost. So for apples, I think it's a little more challenging in the Midwest, I would say. I think there's regenerative, and then there's like regenerative where I want to be. And oftentimes I started where I want to be, the most romantic view of regenerative, just the ecosystem working perfectly. And I was just meditating in the background, making it all happen. But haven't quite got there. But I think there's definitely a financial case. And I think it's becoming more and more supported. I think that's been the challenge, is we've been doing this for 7 years and telling our story, and we were coming from a market that was very large wholesale market, and no one even knew what organic was in Michigan, let alone regenerative. So we've been creating all these markets in real time, helping to tell the brands why regenerative, why organic, how is this a better support system for a farmer, but also what's the story for consumers there. So I think it's really been a chicken and the egg situation where when people are ready to support regenerative farmers, I think farms have the opportunity to make those steps, and it's can be financially feasible. I think the base level steps in regenerative, like working on the soil, focusing on really regenerating ecosystems, and then kind of going back for some of the conventional practices because it's a crutch. I see a lot of farms doing that, kind of this blend of conventional and regenerative, and making steps towards regenerative. I think that's kind of been the breadcrumb approach that a lot of farms have taken that we've been mentoring. Is like, we're not ready to go to your level, but can we do the mulching? Can we do the living system underneath the trees? And I think all those pay right up front. Those are like, you switch from herbicide to mulch and your trees grow extremely healthy. You get all these benefits that pencil out after a few years. And
so I'm going to make a statement, but it's really a question. So is it fair to say, so, and just so to be clear, so I believe also that romantic is still possible. I think that responsibility, corporate responsibility, and profitability are not mutually exclusive. I think that the difference is how far out you look. So I don't think you have to, and this is in general, I'm not necessarily regenerative. I'm just saying, Seth and I's background is from the finance world. And again, I think you can, in any operation, you can make it both a healthy place to work, a healthy place for the planet, and a profitable one. When it trips up is when you are short-sighted in your goals. So if you need to make money next year, you're going to have a different set of goals and you're going to have a different set of priorities, and you may have to then sacrifice something that was actually proper and responsible and so forth if your goal is only short-term. And certainly, and that's sort of the reason that we started Locavana and the structure that it started in, is because the thing that we can do, not being farmers or chemists or growers, is make the supply chain so that it's a sustainable supply chain. And that's a big part of why farming margins are reduced by a lot of logistic hurdles and so forth. But holding all that aside, this is the statement that's really a question. Is it fair to say that will you reduce your inputs over time? Because obviously there is one part is you may be able to command a premium sale price for something that's regenerative. And I hope that's true, but that's the easy part. If you can just get more money, that makes everything easier.
Yeah.
Is it possible to reduce inputs over time? Not next year necessarily, not in 5 years, maybe 7, 10, X years, to where your farm, because it would sound like, again, to the non-farmer, when you're depleting soil, when you're putting chemicals, you're eventually going to be in a game of catch up. Well, we got rid of this. Now we have to put this on. We sprayed this. It had this negative effect. Now we have to spray this other thing. Whereas if the thing is naturally and harmoniously in balance, you should just be able to grow something on it. That was a statement.
Yeah.
Is that true?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I think it is. I think we've seen many anecdotes in that, and I've seen many examples of that. And on our own personal farm, we've switched a lot of these practices that we didn't realize were harming what we were doing. I mean, that's the challenge as farmers. If there's a farmer out there that exists that's actually doing it intentionally, I'd be surprised. But most farmers are just trying to get by. They're just, this is what they know. This is the system.
And you can't blame a person necessarily for just making a living, trying to keep the farm.
Right. And oftentimes it's the chemical consultants that are out there just trying to sell you the stuff because it's what's worked, and we're stuck in that system. It's just this snowball effect. So a lot of farms don't get that opportunity to question it even, and don't have the space. So we were fortunate, and I got to step outside of the farm and really see those examples all around the world of where it does work. And I know it to be true. We've seen it on our farm. I think it's certain cases where it's more challenging. I think with fruit, specifically tree fruit, you have this pyramid of resistance basically. So as you get more nutritionally in balance, you start first with eliminating like a lot of the bacterial issues in the tree. So we haven't seen any fire blight since we've been organic. And this is the bane of what a lot of conventional farms spray for a lot of the year. And it can also kill your entire orchard in one season.
Well, that's a huge cost. Plus the treating of it is a huge cost.
Right.
So avoiding that is saving you a lot of money.
It is, yeah, and saving us a lot of tree mortality, which is like the ultimate loss.
Wow.
So we spend so much time planting an orchard, and it's 3 to 5 years since we plant, or from when we plant it to when we harvest the first apples, and we'll often keep a tree for hopefully in perpetuity. But that's the goal, is to try and create that resilient of a system. But a lot of farms will plant a tree, and 2 years in we'll get fire blight and have to cut the whole tree off, or if it gets bad, you actually lose your entire block. So
what about government funding? Is there any government funding for organic and regenerative? You think that states, cities, the federal government would want farmers not to be using a bunch of pesticides, things that, hurt the soil and hurt the surrounding areas with, runoff into the water. Is there any funding? I know there's funding for like soybeans and things like that for incentives to grow certain things, but is there anything related to organic or regenerative?
It's pretty slim. A lot of the funding goes into those row crops, a lot into the crop insurance programs. And we do get support from crop insurance. So if we have a terrible disaster, we pay into a crop insurance program so that we can hopefully still stay in business for the next year. But
is that private or is that government?
That is government subsidized, but through Greenstone. So it's kind of a co-op system, I guess, there. But that's one of our lifelines, but that's not specific to organic, and it disincentivizes you to be organic through crop insurance. If you convert to crop insurance from conventional, they immediately knock your coverage down from 100% to 60%. So
really,
and the amount of bushels, because they just assume organic growers are going to struggle more, which we've actually, we struggled in the beginning, but we've learned a way, and now we're continuing to actually match our neighbors on a lot of production, and growing that with integrity and the quality that we're after as well. But awesome. Government programs, though, I wear a suit way more often than I want to try and tell this story and help growers find a way to do this, because I think there is that, especially in the beginning, it's really difficult to learn how to actually make that transition. And that's where we struggled most. So I'm looking for ways to help support growers to make that transition. So
that's phenomenal.
Yeah, we've been a part of some very small grants, but in the past it's been difficult to get those for organic, and regenerative even harder. It's kind of all this area where people assume it's lower production, less. It's not as good for the system to have more organic, or there's some perception there, but I think we're hitting a tipping point right now. It's really exciting in regenerative, and I've helped to organize a working group in Michigan that's working to define regenerative as well as we can as a group, and then move forward and trying to influence policy. And but it's really just a group of farmers and researchers, and the main goal is just like, how do we get regenerative to farmers? Like, we want farmers to feel like they're supported in this process, and right now there's very little support other than the few brands that pop up, and there's not very little brands out there that are talking about regenerative, but we happen to be part of most of them because we're constantly telling that story.
So let me ask you the other super hard question.
Yeah.
I asked this to everybody that'll listen to the question. I don't want to say it's unanswerable, but it's dynamic, let's say.
Yeah.
Is there a path to being able to scale regenerative practices to where we can feed the population of the United States with those practices? Obviously, conventional is such a huge portion, and there's certain efficiencies in the quantity, not quality, not even nutritional quality, but just the number of pounds of food that they can produce. Again, not next year, not in 5 years, but is there a path to where we could do that?
I don't know if there's a path where we don't do that, is I guess the better question. I think we look at the citrus industry where they just continued to kill and mine the soil, and now we have barely a citrus industry left because we haven't thought about that. And the farms that are the only lighthouse, or the only light posts there, are the farms that are moving in a regenerative space to really try and look, why is this citrus greening really here? Is it because maybe we killed everything in our orchards and turned it into an abyss? And so same thing with many of these spaces. I think we can mine our soils, but there's many books out there that talk about what are the things that end a civilization, and oftentimes it's related to food and agriculture. And if we just mine our soils to the end of times, we're going to continue to see these drastic issues, not only with right now what we're seeing with health and these concerns with what we're actually putting into our body, but also looking at the longer climate impacts and the microclimates and kind of the small water cycle. We're really seeing these massive jumps and this instability, and what we used to think was a normal year doesn't exist anymore. And what we used to think, trees could handle, and those small unresilient trees that are spoon fed, you have one thing that happens and the whole tree dies. So I think it's less about when regenerative takes over as much as like when people are ready to actually make that switch and embrace it so that we can preserve a food system, preserve this land. And I think, I think it's the only way that we move forward. And that's why I jumped on board 10 years ago. Just like, how do we figure this out? And everyone told me it was impossible. And 10 years later, I know it to be possible. I still don't have everything figured out, but it's not me alone doing it anymore.
Is this how most of the rest of the world, would you say Europe is sort of doing this and would maybe be a data point to prove that it is possible to scale? Would you say that's true, or are they not doing it?
I think they're doing that in different aspects in different regions. I think some areas are very pro-regenerative type practices. And I think the way they've developed their support system for growers is really, you just see growers there. They're more content with life. They don't have to just keep planting more and more acreage, let alone they can't afford it. But there's a system there that encourages farming and good farming. I think that's really the question, is what are we encouraging here? And we've only been encouraging farmers for the past 3 generations to produce more and more and more, and on less and less and less. So we can only expect so much from that. But
interesting.
It's a race to the bottom, and we're seeing it. Our neighbors are disappearing faster than we've ever seen.
Yeah. Let's hope we bounce from the bottom.
Yeah. Well, back to your point on young growers. I think that's the thing right now. We're at it's going to be one of the biggest transitions in farm ownership because of this aging farmer group. It's
every industry right now is going through that pain.
Yeah, and it's going to be the biggest one in agriculture over the next 10 years. And that's creating a space not only for young growers, but also young researchers and every part of agriculture is starting to shift. And we're seeing it now. People are able to ask the questions that 5 years ago people said you were crazy to ask, if there's something living in the soil, or if we should be focusing on microbes in the soil rather than trying to kill them all, or trying to get to the root cause of things rather than spraying other pesticides. So I think it's really encouraging, and we're seeing a complete transition, and those young growers and people asking for it. Frankly, that's the biggest thing, the storytelling piece of it. I think that's really the biggest momentum builder. Is like, people just don't know what they don't know. And in agriculture, it's still very much about like, we don't know a lot. So let's keep asking questions. Let's get good data, good research, and try and find solutions, not only to better food, but I think agriculture can be a help to a bunch of things. It's the root of civilization often. So
it's pretty important to stay alive. You got to eat.
So let me ask you this. So here's another challenge that we face being in the Midwest is it's now April 21st, and it is really hard for us to find vegetables. So in the wintertime, what is the solution for people who live in Rockford, Michigan, Greensville, Michigan? If they want to get vegetables, if they want to get certain things that aren't typically available, what are your thoughts on some of like the hydroponic farming, greenhouses? What do you think the long-term solution is there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the Michigander in me, or the person who's connected to the land, just says to eat seasonally, but I know how boring that gets as well. So.
So you can't eat vegetables in the wintertime?
I think there's a lot you can do. Yeah, I think there's storage vegetables. There's a lot of things that store. There's canning. There's all these things to preserve things. But I think sometimes in the winter you just want something fresh. So it's difficult to get excited about another soup. So I would say, there's some incredible stuff coming. I think hydroponics has its space. I think there's kind of this push and pull with hydroponics and organic of like, what are we really doing for the environment there? But I think in big cities, it does serve a purpose, and in the Midwest. But I think really there's a lot of work around season extension with greenhouses. That's really interesting. I think Asia has a big leap on this, where they're actually growing pretty much anything anywhere because they get the right greenhouse set up, underground greenhouses even, where they're mostly underground and just with the top exposed for sunlight. So you're able to get this incredible insulative value. And essentially you could be growing citrus in Michigan, and people do it. So
if energy costs keep going down, You would think that at some point you can get the perfect environment with the perfect humidity, perfect temperature, and maybe you can grow like bananas in the Midwest.
Yeah, I think you could. I think that's the question of should we is another question, but I think we can, and I think we can do certain things. There's some low-hanging fruit there, unintended, strawberries and all these things that they're already doing in greenhouses. And I think it's a good fit. I just think it's part of it. I don't think we can rely on growing everything here, and hopefully we can look at what's best suited to our microclimates, our local context, and really get better at that, I think.
Right.
And that's changing. We used to be a zone 5B, and now we're zone 5, or maybe it's the other way. We were a zone 5A, and now we're zone 5B, I think. So just over the past, since I've been farming, that's changed. So we'll see what the next 30 years, maybe we'll be growing pineapples sooner than we expect. Hopefully not. Apples don't really thrive in that, but that's farming. We're always adapting. And we don't just grow apples either. I didn't really mention that much, but we plant everything we can. We've got every type of stone fruit and
bees,
herbs. Yeah, bees. My brother's our beekeeper. My youngest brother, Eric, is our beekeeper. So actually, it was a really tough year on bees this year. Like a big portion of the population, he lost quite a lot in his.
Bees are so hard. I used to have beehives, and man, they're difficult. Everything wants to kill a bee.
What was the animal that would was it rats that would come get them?
Skunks love bees.
I never had animals. You have to protect against, well, you got to worry about bears, obviously.
Varroa mites.
Bears, it's mostly mites. And, not mites.
Mites.
Not mice, mites.
Yeah.
Little tiny things. Or, there's colony collapse disorder, which probably, I don't know if it's proven, but it's more or less true that it's caused by pesticides. And it basically, bees, like they fly, they always know how to get home. That like makes them forget how to get home. So they leave and then they never come back.
Neonics, they're just terrible on the bees. Ability to know how much energy they have to go and come back, and they run out of energy.
Yeah, it's weird. But bees are so cool, and it's a lot of fun, and they're like probably one of the most interesting creatures because it's like Game of Thrones. They are so like the way you keep an eye on your hive, and you'll see after a while they create a queen cell because you can see that it's like 2 or 3 cells wide, and when that happens, there's a queen in there. But there's like a group of shot callers in the beehive, and it's like this alpha group. And they decide one day this queen is like dried up, so we're going to get rid of her. But before we do that, we have to get her to plant more queens. And that's all dependent upon this royal jelly. So they go in there and they create because all the queen does is lay eggs. She doesn't know what she's laying. And then they like make them into certain things. So you have like your workers, you have your guard bees, you have your alpha bees. All the ones out on flowers are all females. All the work in the hive is done by females. And you have a few of these big bees, and all they do is mate the queen, basically.
It's their only purpose, the drones.
Yeah. And then
they kick them out in the winter even. Yeah. Just kill them and get new ones.
So the queen will they'll go make like 2 or 3 new queens. And so whichever the first one that hatches, the first thing that new queen does, it goes over and kills the other 2 in the cells. And then they kill the old queen, and now there's like a new reign. It's crazy stuff, but they're fascinating, and they're really a lot of fun, but it's a tough hobby because you have to like wrap the hives in tar paper every winter. You do everything you possibly can. And then there's like, I tried to do it organically. You can put this like acid strip in there.
Formic acid.
Yeah, which I think is organic. I don't know. Maybe it's a gray area, but it's supposed to keep the mites off. That's the only, but you wouldn't want to eat the honey though while it's in there. So you can kind of do that when you're not going to eat the honey. And then if you want, I've tried it both ways, and I don't know, you go out there all winter, you look at them, you look for activity. Okay, they're doing okay. You go out there in the spring, you open it up and they're all dead. And it's like, man, son of a...
It's tough. Yeah. My brother goes through.
I probably lost I had 3 hives. If one made it through a winter, it was a lot. Sometimes it was all of them. It's like, man, that's tough.
Yeah, he started the winter with 120 and it's down to 40, but he also split. Most of those were splits, so they were going in pretty small. But yeah, he's got 60 hives on the farm permanently.
Wow,
so we
that
have
is so much work.
That would be like the most
crazy.
impossible thing for most conventional farmers because they're always spraying pesticides. So we take it kind of as a canary in the coal mine of how we're doing on the farm. If we see issues or see the hive thriving, then we know that we're doing things as in balance as we can. And then we've also got about 15 acres of wildflowers on the farm, and a lot of those are medicinal. So we hope that we can kind of build up that medicinal pollen for them, and hopefully they gain some of that benefit in the hives as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hives, it's a tough one.
All right. Last question.
Yeah.
Do you like apple pie?
Oh, I hate it. No.
What?
No, apple pie is great. I think
it's the most amazing thing there is.
I think there's some apples that make a way better apple pie, and Northern Spy is a good one. You mentioned
that's what I used to use.
Yeah,
actually. It was so good.
Spies for pies. Grew up with that one.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, we grow a lot of really fun varieties. You asked me I think would you say the one best variety? I don't think I'll ever grow for that, but we've got a lot of really incredible apples, and that's some awesome. Of them that
Sweet Tango, you were saying that one's pretty good.
That one's really good. Yeah. It's just a brilliant apple to eat, and it's one of the earliest apples too, so it's just a great balance of sweet and tart and with a nice bouquet. But we also grow some apples that are just like, whoa, what did I just bite? And those are the ones I love, are the ones that are just so packed with flavors and like you almost have to sit down after you bite it. That's awesome. It's just there's almost every flavor you can find in an apple, which is pretty wild to think of. But there's chocolate, banana, every fruit, and we've got not all of those yet, but working on that. And then we've got apples that are red on the inside, actually. So it's just this bright red, almost looks like
to eat that.
Yeah, Kissabel is the name of one of them, and
that's cool. We
should have some of those, but those are my favorite to make a pie with. They just this bright hue that comes out. That's out of a pie.
Wow.
It's almost a little bit of a cranberry flavor, but super high in antioxidants. And I'll stop trying to sell Kissabel right here.
Cool.
Awesome.
Anything else you want to say about the farm, or anything else, or any other topics?
Yeah. Well, I think I want to make sure I don't miss that we're part of an incredible team, not only on our farm for starters. I mean, my dad and grandpa started this. None of this was possible without them, but now my brother's a part of the team, and I'm just distracted at every corner of the farm. So it's so nice to have this kind of team effort now where we're really all working towards the same goal. And our team as well, we've got about 7 full-time employees that have been with us for a very long time, some of them over 30 years. Cool. And this just been incredible to work with, and so grateful.
Do they like the new direction?
I think they do. I think certain things are like, why are we doing this again? Why do you have us going wrapping cardboard around the trunks, or shoveling wood chips, or these things that don't make a lot of sense in the short term, but I think it's starting to click for a lot of them. And you see some of them that are now like, hey, did you hear about this thing you can plant around trees and deter this pest? I'm like, oh, that's great. Nice. Great idea. So we're working on all those projects, really trying to get our team to be part of it. I don't like the leadership of trying to like be this authoritarian person who's just pointing in every direction. I really want it to be like, this is our family, this is our team, and it's led from the bottom up, and each person has that we wouldn't exist without them. So I'm just, super grateful for that. And then all the supporting characters that are around us, our extension, our MSU has some incredible people, like I said, that are really opening up. For the longest time, nobody wanted to talk to me, and now I'm talking to MSU just about every day. They're doing a bunch of research on the farm this year, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, I can't do this alone, and I thought I was going to have to for a long time. So I'm just really grateful now to see this momentum building, and to feel like there's a real fit for this, and really passionate about it. So excited to see this opportunity and just save the planet one apple at a time. So
there you go.
Do what we can.
Yeah. An apple a day keeps destruction of humanity away.
There we go. Yeah, let's redo that one. Yeah.
No, great. You are a pioneer. You're very interesting, very passionate. It shows. And, again, really appreciate your insight, appreciate what you do. Appreciate anybody that doesn't take the easy way. And that certainly defines you, I think. So looking forward to working with you and seeing how we can support, and it's a super important movement. So appreciate you being here.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Yeah, no, love the questions and love this opportunity, and
Right
excited to see where it blossoms.
Indeed. There you go.
Awesome.